getting a YouTube channel set up to share all of these things. So keep an eye out on our website for any posts about that. All right, let me get the captioning started up. All right, cool. So thank you all for coming today. We're going to talk a little bit about the GRE, just sort of introduce you to what the test is and how you might begin the process of studying for the GRE. So without further ado, let's get rolling. First off, there's actually multiple types of GREs. You want to be looking at the GRE general test. The graduate record exam is what it's called, but there's a general test and there are subject subject tests that you could take, like chemistry, biology, physics, psychology. So you don't want to be taking those. Those are not the ones you need to get into vet school or PA school or nursing school or whatever it is that you're taking the GRE for. The test is basically high school level math and reading comprehension with a college level vocabulary. So if you think about it, it's really kind of like the SAT, just a little bit on steroids, because they've added a little bit complexity to the problems. So you don't actually need any college knowledge to do well on the GRE. You just have to work on your vocab acquisition, which is something, if you're like a freshman right now or a second year, you're fully capable of starting to work on vocabulary right now. In general, I would just say read more, read stuff that you're not used to reading, read all of those things. And that's just overall going to help you get prepared for the reading comprehension portion of this test. So what does it look like to take the GRE? So you want to go to ets.org/GRE, ets.org/GRE. ETS stands for Educational Testing Services. It is the company that administers the GRE, and they created the GRE. So you go to ETS to get your account, and then you got to check for your test center availability. And actually, this got updated just a little bit ago. This should actually be December 31st right now. So you can take the GRE from home as an online test on September 30 or by before December 31st. I half expect they will extend that time again further, but there have been difficulties with taking the test at home. If you don't have a solid connection to the internet, then the test will have all kinds of flubs and faults, and you'll have to restart it, and it can create anxiety. So in general, I do think even with COVID, unless you're at risk, it's still probably better to go to a testing center to take the exam. Just because of all the inherent issues with the online testing that I've heard about. Once you see if there's a testing center availability or there's a date in which you can take your test, you would register for the GRE again through the ETS account. And then before that, you want to consider, do you need to apply for accommodations? You want to apply for accommodations at least 2 to 3 months before you're going to sign up for your test. You want to know you have accommodations before you sign up, because if you sign up for a test and then apply for accommodations, even if you get those accommodations awarded, that test you signed up for will not have the accommodations. It will only be the test that you sign up for after you receive the accommodations. So that's something to consider as well. When it comes to accommodations, there's two things to think about there. If you received accommodations at Davis, but you did not have accommodations at high school, particularly a public high school, you will probably need to go see an educational psychologist. The reason for that is you need a full evaluation of your learning disability, if you have one, and what the specific accommodations are that you would need. Now, if you did have accommodations in high school and you went to a public high school, it's pretty well documented already, and that's going to be in your IEP, your Individualized Education Plan, the IEP. And you would just request your IP from the high school, from the school district that you went to, and they would provide that for you. And that's usually enough to get accommodations for this thing. Currently, the test costs $205 in the US, which, because we fall in the all other areas of the world, part of this list. However, by next year, if you're taking it next year, it may go up. It tends to go up like $5 every year. So I would not be surprised if it was $210 next year to take the GRE. And that's each time you take a test. As far as retaking, once you take the test, if you want to retake it, you can take it up to 5 times within a 12-month period. I do not suggest you shoot for that. I would say one and done is what you really want to do. But if you have to retake because you need a slightly higher score or something like that, you can register as soon as your test is done, because you will know your score right then and there. It's what's called an estimated score, but I have never really seen the estimated scores not be the real scores that get turned in. But you can't register for a test unless it's 21 days later. So you can register right away, but it just has to be for a test that's 21 days down the road. So 3 weeks. They want you to wait 3 weeks between attempts. So what does the test look like? This is a computer adaptive test, and we'll talk about what the adaptive nature is, but you start with 60 minutes of writing. So you got 2 essays, 30 minutes per essay. If you finish your first essay in 15 minutes, you still only get 30 minutes for the second essay. So you might as well just use all 30 minutes for the essay that you have, because otherwise it's just wasted time. The more you write on the essay, the better. Then you get your first 2 sections. One will be verbal, one will be quant. It could come in either order. Then you get an optional break. This is sort of your lunchtime or your just mental break, stare at the wall and do nothing time. Eat a snack. I would encourage you to have a high protein, high complex carb, low simple carb, low fat snack. So something like raisins and peanuts, good old raisins and peanuts, trail mix is a pretty good snack. Or beef jerky is always good. Something to keep your energy up while not putting you to sleep. Then after the break, you have 3 more sections, 2 verbals and a quant, or 2 quants and a verbal, or 1 verbal, a quant, and what they call a research section. The research section is unscored. It could be verbal, it could be quant, it could be both. It generally has fewer questions than the other sections, and they will identify it as the research section. If you don't have a research section, one of the 5 sections you took is a experimental section, which is not going to be identified. So if you have 3 verbals and 2 quants overall and no research section, you had an experimental verbal section. They just don't tell you which one it was. It's kind of annoying that that's the case, but it is what they do. It's an adaptive test in that your ability, your performance on the first section determines what happens later on in the test. So if you're on the first section, and it's going to be generally medium, like the medium level questions on that first section. If you don't do well on that first section, your second section will be very, very simple. Like there'll be softball questions all over it, but that also means you're probably gunning for a 130 to 150 on that score. You're not really going to break the 150 mark, which is the median. Well, a little bit lower than the median now. If you do medium performance on the middle first section, your second section is going to be about the same. It's going to look very similar to your first section. Now you're in that score range of 140 to 160. That's okay for the verbal. You want to be there for verbal. For the quant, you definitely want to get that wicked hard second section, because if you do really well on the first section, your next set is going to be a lot of really tough questions. And then you're looking at your score is definitely above the 150. And why is it that you want to be focused on quant for you guys? Like, why is that the most important section of the GRE for you? What are y'all going to do? What kind of programs you going into? vet, nurse, PA, MPH, social work. So we got a vet, a PA, a vet. So those are primarily science-based fields, which means your quant section is the one that they're going to consider more important. In fact, like the vet school at Davis will straight up tell you, we don't actually care about your verbal score. I will say they probably care a little bit that if it's like, you know, a 130, that's not great. You probably want to hit at least a 150, but it's not the most important section. The quant is going to be the most important section for you guys. Unless of course you're doing something that's a little bit less science-based, but considering y'all came here for HPA, but none of you guys are in that boat. So there you go. The two essays, one is an analyze an issue, one is an analyze an argument. They're just really they just only need to be very basic structure. Like a good 5 or 6 paragraph essay is sufficient to score what you would want to score on these things, which is actually a mediocre score. Again, nobody cares about the writing. Nobody looks at it in these types of programs. Unless you're going to go be a journalist, the writing is pretty much a moot point. Just write so you can show that you can read and write English, and that's what they're looking for. Then the verbal reasoning section is split up 50-50 between text completion and sentence equivalence, which is all vocab questions. It's basically which of these words would work here in this sentence. And if you don't know the vocab, you're gonna have a hard time. So vocab acquisition is a very important task for you guys to do in the next, you know, X months before you actually take the test. The other half is reading comprehension, and it's actually pretty basic reading comprehension, but it's made more difficult because, you guessed it, the vocabulary level of the writing is very, very high. So you're going to have to, again, work on getting a bigger vocabulary, and you should be okay on this section. Quantitative reasoning is split up into 35% of what we call quantitative comparison questions. And these are the questions where they'll give you some like quantity A and quantity B, and they're basically asking you to say whether they're equal, whether A is greater, whether B is greater, or if it cannot be determined. So it's the same set of answer choices for all of those questions, but that's your job. They'll give you some equation for one of them, a number for another one, or something like that, and you have to solve and see which one is the greater quantity. You'll get about 10% of them are numeric entry questions where you do a calculation and enter your answer. I will say on these, if you're getting complicated answers with decimal points that go like 0.27544333946, that's probably not the correct answer, because these are going to be something that you can enter into the test and it can grade it. So that's usually terminal decimals or simple fractions like half or third or fourth. And then the rest of it is just your basic standard multiple choice questions, mostly word problems there. So this is where people struggle a little bit. And the funny thing is, there's two reasons why you struggle, and it's not because you don't know the material. Number one, it's because the question structures are very complex. They give you things that look like they shouldn't be solvable without a calculator. And you get a calculator, but it only does plus, minus, subtract, and divide. So, but then they give you a problem that has like square roots in it. You're like, how do I solve this? Or there's pi in it. How do I solve this? And the other half of it is it's math that you've done so long ago that you've forgotten it. Like, does anybody remember PEMDAS? What does PEMDAS tell us? See, 6th grade was a long time ago. PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, the order of operations. You got to remember to do your order of operations in some of the questions here. They really are testing on very basic math that you probably have forgotten the basic rules because you've been doing other harder math for so much longer. So it's going to require you to do a little bit of prep on like what are the basic rules of math. In fact, tomorrow our GRE session is for prep session is going to focus on some of the basic rules and definitions of things in math. How's it scored? The verbal and the quant sections get a 130 to a 170 score, and the median is approximately 150, although you can see, I know it's a little hard to see on this table, but the 50th percentile for verbal is right around 150, right on the nose, and the 50th percentile for math is actually a little bit higher. It's like a 153. So you at least want to get above that median on the verbal section. On the quant, you want to maximize that particular score. The writing section is 0 through 6 with half-point increments. You just want to be above a 3.0 on that one. Again, above the median that you have for that thing. If a school tells you their average score is like a 310 or a 320 or a 340, that's not what you want to know. What you want to know is what are their average section scores. So, because what you'll see is the verbal is probably lower than the quant, and that's what you want to know from them. So if they're just giving you a composite score, ask for the breakdown of what their expectations are. It's scale tests, so it means you're not compared to other people that take the test that day, that week, that month. You're compared to a statistical model. That's how this is all figured out. There is no guessing penalty, so just guess away, man. If you don't know the answer to a question, eliminate as many answer choices as you can and guess, because it's better to do that than to leave anything blank on this thing. Better lucky than good. What are your score targets for this guy? Analytical writing, get a 4 or higher. Verbal reasoning, get a 155, or honestly a 153 is what my most common target score is here. It's in the 70th percentile. It's pretty solid. For your quantitative reasoning, get it above a 163. A lot of times people are asked to go into the 165 range for the more sort of specific schools, but this varies so much from school to school that you really need to communicate with the individual programs to which you're applying to make sure you understand what their specific targets are. So always look at where you're going to be applying, and that's the best thing to do. So what is the content of this test? The writing is, like I said, it's just really just making sure you can write English and that you can explain yourself well. You can make a cogent argument. So really the focus here, you want it to be, good grammar, good spelling, a lot of writing. So like having 6 really fleshed out paragraphs, but not busy work writing, not like writing fluff. You don't want to write stuff that's not actually getting you to the point. Here's some examples of the analyze an issue essay. Here we go. Write a response which discuss the extent at which you agree or disagree, They'll give you some issue. They basically want to know, are you pro that issue, con that issue, and why? And the one piece of advice I'm going to give here is, if you are pro an issue, but you can't come up with 3 points to make, but you can come up with 3 con points to make, I don't care if you're pro the issue in real life. Write a con essay, because it's not about what you actually believe on this thing. What it is that can you write a good, solid essay? So if you have more points to make on a position that you don't necessarily believe in, that's okay. Take that position anyway. And the biggest thing too is don't waffle. Like, pick a side and then give one counterpoint. Give 3 points on your side and 1 counterpoint. You don't want to be constantly going like, but I can look at it this way, but then I'll look at it this way, but then, like, pick a side. You're either pro or you're con. There's no middle ground. They want you to establish a position. And it's not because that's what they're looking for per se. It's just easier to read it and find the things they're looking for when they grade it, because you're going to have a human grader and you're going to have a computer grader. The human grader is grading these things so fast that they're just following a rubric, and they want to grade as many of these as possible because they get paid by the essay. So the more essays they grade, the more dollars per hour they make. So they're not really taking time to do a good job reading this thing. The analyze an argument essay is really find the fallacious logic in a short passage. So like, write a response in which you discuss what specific evidence is needed to evaluate the argument and explain how the evidence would weaken or strengthen the argument. Which one's going to be easier to accomplish, weaken or strengthen? Is it easier to find things to tear it down or find things that build it up? Just in general, not even just this essay. What do you find in real life is easier to do? Build it up? Actually, I'm surprised by that, actually. Most of the time, I would find that it'd be weakened. If you find it easier to build it up, then build it up by all means. But most of the time, it's easier to find flaws with things than it is to find things that other things, like good examples to build something up. But if you look at the argument itself, you can find that, like, oh, they made an assumption there. That's a weakness. They made an assumption there. That's a weakness. They made a bad connection between this fact and this fact. That's a weakness. To build it up, you have to take outside information out of your own mind and put it in there to build up what they're saying. That's why generally weaken is going to be an easier task, because you don't have to bring as much outside information into it. Does that make sense? Groovy. Now, the reading comp section, once you get into verbal reasoning, reading comp is just really seeing, can you read and retain, and in some cases actually like draw a conclusion from what that reading said. So like, it might be deciding what the author's main point was, or what the tone of the author was, or if this was true, then what would the author think about it, kind of questions. Those are about half the questions. The other half are going to be straight up like, did the passage say it or not? So those are what I like to call retrieval questions. Those questions are generally pretty straightforward, but if you go on the more difficult side, you're going to be looking at those. What does the author think about this? What does the author think about that type questions? The text completion, like I said, this is really just sentences with blanks in them and picking words that fill the blank appropriately. One of the things here is that it doesn't have to necessarily just be that it works, but that it fits the spirit of the sentence that you're inserting the word into. So tone makes a big difference here. If you've got fantastic versus good, and the sentence has a blank there where fantastic and good would both work, you got to go to tone, because fantastic is a more over the top tone than good. And if the sentence is not getting over the top, then you probably wouldn't put fantastic in there. You just put good. So it's not just the definitions of words, it's their quality of word. Like is it very, very positive? Is it kind of positive? Is it neutral? Is it negative? Is it very negative? That plays into making your decisions on the text completions. So the quant is arithmetic, algebra, geometry, data analysis. The stuff that you're going to find you're going to have the most trouble with is the arithmetic, almost 100% of the time, because these are the things that you learned in 6th grade, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And it's been a long time since you've been in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So arithmetic is going to be the thing you probably want to focus on the most with your practicing. Quantitative reasoning conventions. This is just some things that you got to know about how they structure the questions. It's always real. There's no imaginary numbers. Everything's plain geometry, not three-dimensional geometry, except for occasionally they'll bring a volume kind of question in there. Figures that they draw are not to scale, and let me explain that. Is this a right triangle? No, it is not. But don't be surprised if they do something like this. Or if you calculate something and it turns out that it's like that. So the figure is not to scale. It makes you think it has to be greater than 90, but It doesn't have to be greater than 90. It could be less than 90. It could be 90 degrees itself. It could be anywhere from 0 degrees to 180 degrees. So it's annoying, but they do that to like just find out that you're not like find out if you're actually paying attention to the question. Because what happens is a lot of times people make assumptions based on the figure, but the question said it's a right angle. So if the question says it's a right angle, it's a right angle, even though the figure isn't drawn that way. So a lot of times I would suggest you draw out your own figures because you can draw them to scale better than the test would ever do it. If it's a coordinate grid, it will be to scale. They can't mess with that. And then bar graphs, line graphs, all that fun stuff are also going to be to scale. So you don't have to worry about weird nonlinear estimates and that kind of stuff. The quant comps, like I said, they're going to be comparing quantity A and B, which one is greater, or are they the same, or the relationship cannot be given. For many of these questions, I want you to think about using the 3 trial method. Because a lot of times you need to test out the problem 3 different times to find out if you're getting consistent results. So like if you find out the quantity A is greater 3 times in a row, then quantity A is greater. If you find out the quantity A is greater twice in a row, and then the 3rd time you find out it's the same as B, then you actually need to go and say, oh, well, it looks like it cannot be determined because the rules changed. So 3 trials, good number of trials for these things. The multiple choice, sometimes they select a single answer, sometimes they select more than one answer. So always, always, always read the question for what they're expecting. And then numeric entry are, if they need a fraction, they'll give you 2 boxes. If not, it'll be an integer or a decimal number. But remember, long decimals or terminating decimals? What's the expectation on numeric entry questions here? Is a 0.3472299653 a reasonable answer for a question like this? Nope, you want those terminal decimals, the 0.5, 0.25, something like that. Exactly. So it's a way to check yourself if you're going off the reservation for some of these questions. You can like say, wait a minute, I think I must have done something wrong mathematically. Let me go back and check my work. So what are the prerequisites? What are the prerequisites for the GRE? Are there any? Nope, there are none. It's a big old blank page because if you went to high school, and if you're in college, you went to high school, you have enough knowledge for the math and the English requirements of this test. So there's no classes you need to take. The only consideration going into the GRE, if you want to do it earlier than later, it's often easier. But you have to watch out for the fact that some schools will not accept the GRE score that's older than 5 years old. So don't take it as just as a freshman just to get rid of it if you're going to take a couple gap years, because then you would probably have to take the test again. What are the kind of resources out there available for the GRE? Well, you've got your big 3, Kaplan, Princeton Review, and Manhattan Prep. You got this kind of an upstart Magoosh. I will say some of their apps are good, like the vocab app is good, but some of their questions are questionable. Like I don't feel that they have a good set of practice problems to provide. They aren't always GRE focused. So I would stick to Manhattan Prep, Kaplan, or Princeton Review for getting solidly written materials that represent what's on the GRE. There is official content. The official content, I would say the thing you want the most from there is PowerPrep. PowerPrep is their program that you download, which has practice tests in it. So you get 2 for free. You can buy 3 more. Those are the official practice tests. They're actually really good practice tests to do, in addition to any practice tests you get with your materials, like your books, or if you buy a question bank or something like that. I do want to point out one in particular that I really love, and that's the Manhattan Prep 5-pound book of practice problems. It's kind of like the Bible of practice materials. So you should always make sure you have practice tests. Make sure you have practice problems. That would be the 5-pound book. Make sure you have some book or video that covers the strategy and content of the test. And it's not a bad idea to get the official guide to the GRE from ETS, just so you can get their take on it. So all in, you're probably talking, if you're self-prepping, you could purchase everything you need for about 150, like including Power Prep. If you leave out Power Prep and just use practice tests from other sources, you could probably get out of there with like, you know, $75 using Amazon to buy materials. Do you need to do a prep course? I mean, that's really up to you. I think at the end of the day, what I would suggest is take a practice test before you make that kind of a decision. If your practice test has you near where you want to be, then yeah, just self-prep. This test requires about 2-ish months of studying every other day for a couple hours. This is not a high study test like the MCAT might be. If you know anybody taking the MCAT, they're probably spending 8 hours a day for a whole summer studying the MCAT or something like that. That's not what the GRE is about. You generally just got to do a lot of practice problems again and again and again until you just aren't surprised by what you see anymore. So when you're doing your studying, just do content review until you get done with that, but also do practice problems every single time you practice. I do suggest 5 full lengths before you do take the real thing, and start taking them right away. Because if you take your practice test periodically, you're likely to see that gradual improvement over time that builds confidence. If you wait to take your first practice test until like after you're done studying the content, quote unquote, then you're going to do pretty bad on it. Generally speaking, people do not see the improvement without actually doing practice problems. So start with a cold test, then every few weeks take another practice test and make sure you're making progress in your studying, because it's very indicative of whether or not your studying is being effective or not. So what I'll do is I'm going to open up the floor to questions. I will point out that we do have a mock test coming up on November 14th. We're going to be, I think I'm using the Kaplan test, I want to say. And so with the Kaplan test, you'll just end up signing for a Kaplan account and a Kaplan test, and we'll administer online. I'll meet up with everybody in a Zoom room before the test begins. Just make sure everybody's ready to go and everything's working. There's no snafus coming up. And then just get you guys started on taking the practice test. And the following we will discuss the score report and what you can tell from a score report and how that might help you determine how you're going to practice, how you're going to get prepped for this thing. I do advising in the mornings from Monday to 9 to 12 on Monday through Friday. So feel free to set up an appointment if you want to look at your specific needs. I also do drop-ins for test prep only. Drop-in study hall hours, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You can feel free to bring me specific questions. Like say you're doing a practice test and you just like have no idea how you're supposed to come up with an answer. And bring that. Come on, let's pop it in the screen and we'll do a Zoom session. It's a Zoom session, and we'll just chat about it and see what we can do about tweaking your skills, or if you're worried about your strategy, we can talk about strategy. If you need to retake and you don't know what to do there, we can talk about that too. So pretty much anything that you can think of comes up. You'll find the Zoom link, hpa.ucdavis.edu/test prep is what I'm trying to say. So any questions for me about the GRE? I'm putting it on YouTube. It's not there yet. I'm still working on getting our account fixed for YouTube, but then I will have this video on there. So keep an eye on our website, on the test prep website, and or our Facebook page, and we will post links to them at that point. Any other questions? The HPA Facebook page. So go on to Facebook and look up Health Professions Advising, and you will find that we have a web page, our Facebook page there, and you can like the Facebook page to get announcements about things that are coming. All of our events are on there. Like this event was posted as an event on Facebook too. So all our courses that we do, all our seminars, webinars, etc., are going to be posted on the Facebook page with events. Does it look bad if you take the GRE more than once? No, nobody cares about that. If you take it 5 times in a year and the score is not going up, then it might be cause for looking at the application a little more critically. But if you take it 2 or 3 times, nobody's going to bat an eye. In fact, a lot of schools will just say, hey, before you get here, just take the GRE again and get this score on this section. So the GRE is not really a huge barrier to entry into vet and PA programs. I know that if you go on places like Reddit or Student Doctor Network, it may seem otherwise, but those are just a lot of people talking things that they don't necessarily understand. So yeah, the GRE is not one of those things that is a huge barrier to entry. So if you don't have the best GRE score in the world, you're still probably fine. I love how the captions always give me a different version of what I say when I say GRE. This time it was Yuri. Any other questions about this wonderful test? Any course for writing improvement? Honestly, any comp course that you might take at Davis, UWP courses as a whole are generally pretty good. Any amount of writing that you do. But in general, just like even in some of those classes, they might give you a lot of rules about writing that probably may not apply to the GRE, because the GRE is the writing expectation there is simple writing. You don't want to have very fancy writing because it makes it harder to find your points. So like where your composition class might tell you first, next, last is a terrible way to structure an essay, but on a GRE, it's actually very helpful because it's it helps the reader find the point you're trying to make much more rapidly. So you'll usually get a higher score out of something like that. So simple writing, don't get fancy. Fancy writing gets lower scores on the whole. It is only English and math. There's no science on this test. They might have a data table with like numbers with units on it, but it's not like science content. You don't have to know any science content. Other questions? These are all great questions. Thank you. All right, it seems like there's nothing else right now. If you do have any additional questions, feel free to email me or set an appointment or pop into drop-ins on Mondays, Wednesdays, or Fridays, and I will be there to answer those questions. So there's nothing else. Well, we can go ahead and sign off a little bit early. So thank you all for coming, and I will look forward to seeing you in some of our test prep stuff.
One more question.
Sure thing.
Sorry to interrupt you. So if I know that every year our school provide that the GRE preps like sessions. So which like how early do you recommend people to register, like participate in the session before their real exam?
Like 3 months. So if you're taking it, say, in the summer of 2021, do the spring quarter rotation through our program. If you're taking in the spring quarter, do the winter rotation through it. So like what's one quarter before?
Do you recommend like doing more much earlier than that, or Is it?
Not really. It's not going to be super helpful at that point, because you might forget things, and you're not going to be practicing so much. You want to be doing that while you're working on actually studying for the test.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Have a good rest of your day.